Let's continue. Sorry for the interruption there. We were hoping to move it a bit faster, but obviously the Prime Minister stayed much longer than expected, which was great for you. But what it means is that the time has shifted. So what you've seen is this morning from the Prime Minister is much greater access than I think we were expecting. But interesting for me that he is not prepared to yet commit, that he and his government have convinced the World Bank and certainly the IMF that there'll be a new tranche coming of 750 billion by the end of this year. You will take your own conclusions, but he paused for rather a long time. We're going to make this last an hour rather than an hour and a quarter, but what we want to do is talk about the economy of the 21st century. It really is an era of change and opportunity, but look what's happening. Janet Yellen in the United States is struggling to keep the government afloat. The US has been down that track before, but running out of money. Yes, running out of money. You know the kind of energy roller coaster we're on. 10x for gas prices until President Putin's announcement yesterday, but who knows how long that will last. And it still leaves prices way up, maybe 6x or 7x above where they were just literally a few months ago. We've got inflation threatening in a big way. We've got a massive recalibration of the jobs market, of jobs vacancies, of job demand, of what people want to do, particularly after the pandemic, the decisions they are taking about their own lifestyle as well. The Economist yesterday posted the following. Is the world economy going back to the 1970s? And they started talking about stagflation. And they underscored, and this is what I want to get into with the panelists, they underscored that the past is not the best guide to the present. I'm doing this big work about thinking the unthinkable or thinking the unpalatable. It's about how much all of you are thinking in different ways about the way things are going. Quite apart from the Ukraine national situation, it's about the context, the geopolitical, the geo-economical context in which you're all operating, and the fact that much of what you've taken for granted is simply no longer relevant. And let me put to you that with the climate emergency, and the Prime Minister just talked about it, one of the questions was about carbon, and it came up in the video as well. With the climate emergency, much of what you take for granted is going to have to change because of the consumption of hydrocarbons and the way we run our lives. I've been struck, if I may, I've been coming here one way or the other for 30 years, the enormous traffic jams in KIEF this morning, even bigger than when I was last here 2 years ago. So there's a materialist ambition, which is inevitable, but can the planet survive and can the planet afford it? I put those things to you because it's about thinking very radically in all of this. Let me introduce who is joining us. We have two joining us, as you can see in the top right-hand corner. We have from London, Anne Cairns, who's Executive Vice Chair of MasterCard. Good morning, Anne. We also have Chandran Nair, who's founder and chief executive of the Global Institute for Tomorrow. Chandran, lovely to see you. You're joining us from Hong Kong to give us the Asian perspective. And here on the platform, we have Minister Mykhailo Fedorov, Vice Prime Minister, Minister of Digital Transformation. Welcome. But you are, I would say, a young progressive. You've been in business. You know what life is like at the cutting edge, quite apart from the business of being in business in government. We also have Henryka Bochniarz, welcome, founder and chairwoman of the main council of the Polish Confederation, Lewiatan, and that's an association of private employers, a former Minister of Industry and Trade, and also restructured and privatized 7,000 companies during her time. But your CV is so long that I'm not going to read it out. Otherwise, we'll be here until lunchtime, just reading your CV. And finally, not finally because I'm making a value decision, but I want to come to you first, Grzegorz Kolodko, Professor of Economics, Director of TIGER, Transformation, Integration, and Globalization Economic Research at the Kozminski University in Warsaw, a former Minister of Finance in Poland between 1994 and 1997, when, of course, Poland was going through dramatic changes. And I should tell you that I was in the shipyard strikes in Gdansk in 1980, and seeing what's happening in Poland 40 years on is quite remarkable. But Anne, I'd like to come to you very first before I go to Grzegorz, because what you do at MasterCard, and you're a partner of this, this conference, you have an extraordinary amount of data about how people are spending their money and what changes there are in spending habits and willingness to spend, quite apart from the fact that people don't want cash anymore, or most people don't want cash. What kind of conclusions have you been drawing, not in the last 10 years, but the last 10 weeks and 10 months, about spending patterns, which could very much influence the kind of discussion we're going to have here about the era of change, but also of opportunity? What at MasterCard are you concluding about the way people are spending money anywhere, whether it be the most developed countries or the least developed countries?
Well, thanks, Nick. Yeah, we do have a lot of data, and the reason for that is that we reach about 3 people on the planet with our products and services. And of course, as you mentioned, there's been a huge switch from cash to electronic, and such a big switch that in 10 weeks of last year, we saw change that we hadn't seen in the previous 5 years. And of course, that switch was to buy online, and that's to be expected because people are living in their homes. But also subsequent to that, we've seen people actually supporting their local community, buying products and services within 15 minutes of where they live. So it's a combination of global and local happening all at once. And out in the developing countries, what we're seeing is people thinking about bringing up digital identity so that they can pay their citizens. Since the COVID crisis, about 1 billion people have received payments from their governments, and we think that that will continue. And to link it through to things like climate change, what we're seeing in places like Africa are people buying things like small solar panels that they can put in their homes and paying for these using their mobile phones on a pay-as-you-go basis. So linking payments to things that generate electricity so that they can actually live their lives and be connected to the digital economy.
Do you think there is a new model emerging, or is that too dramatic to say at the moment? A new model of economic behavior or not?
Well, it's difficult to say at the moment. I mean, obviously, there are some countries where you have a lot of people with savings, and there's pent-up demand to spend, pent-up demand to do things like travel, which has been highly restricted and so on. So from a consumer behavior point of view, you've got a couple of things that are happening in the economy. But I think one of the biggest things that we've seen is also what's going on in the supply chains around the world, because the supply chains are extremely disrupted. And I think it could be a time that in trade finance and so on, that you see the development of a whole new model. And this will actually relate to the things that you discussed, such as climate change.
But the main thing you're saying is everything is moving very fast and almost in surprising ways, in ways which possibly even you at MasterCard had not been expecting or predicting.
Yes, it's moving very fast. I would say that the COVID crisis has accelerated digitalization. We're now staring into a future with 5G, artificial intelligence. The Chinese are pressing ahead with digital currency. So there are many different moving parts, open banking's opening up around the world. So I think in the finance sector, we're seeing incredible speed happening.
Right.
Of course, on top in the gas sector and so on. You've got algorithmic trading, you've got the volatility of the gas prices, you've got the clearing houses with all of the margins changing pretty dramatically in the last couple of days even. So yeah, we're seeing all of that.
Grzegorz, Kolodko, you're the professor. You look at economic theory, you look at economic models. Do we have a model for where we are at the moment? There are many who say the models are bust. We've got to understand we've entered new territory for which there is no model to look back to for guidance. And that's why I mentioned what The Economist posted yesterday about are we going back to the 1970s, to stagflation at very high speed? Your quick view as a professor of economics.
No, we don't have any model. We have much more questions than answers, and definitely the future is neither to be shaped by inertia from the past, nor there is any determinism. It very much depends on development strategy and economic policies in given countries, and to bigger extent than ever in the past on coordination between the countries. For that reason, we have to put some trust in forthcoming COP26 conference as far as fighting climate is concerned, or say what OECD is trying to do to fight money laundering, to control migration, and so on. So the biggest challenge for the future, which must be taken into account if one is Deputy Prime Minister or Prime Minister of Ukraine, Poland, whatever, Brazil or the Philippines, is how to find a place in countries' development strategy in this world, presuming, and that's in my model, that globalization is irreversible. Because as we know, some people more, I think, in politics than in business, but also in academia, they say, well, globalization is over. Make no mistake. Globalization will stay here.
What is your view?
My view is that it is irreversible because of the good of trade, transnational trade, and the economy of scales.
But it'll be on a different basis, because we're even seeing containerization.
I would say that everything is contextual. So when I'm taking a look on the map of the world, geopolitics, as you mentioned, geoeconomics, as you mentioned, I would answer myself being the, again, Deputy Prime Minister of Poland or Prime Minister of Ukraine, where we are. The biggest chance for Poland and Ukraine, here we are similar with all the differences, it is that we are at the same time, we more in Poland than you in Ukraine, a part of Euro-Atlantic sphere and Euro-Asian sphere. So we have to work as much as we only can towards business, politics, culture, etc., towards coordination of the policies with the West, but also with the East. If you allowed, and if there was a time, I had a couple of questions for the Prime Minister. I would ask Prime Minister, for instance, what do you do to join Chinese initiative of Belt and Road and 16+1? I would like to see it 17+1, and it is a very weird figure that Ukraine is not in this initiative, especially since you need so much to invest in infrastructure. So the world of the future is not along any model unless you would agree that it's a model of bipolar world. That is the world of the future. There won't be any leader. There will be the problem. There won't be any clash of civilization in an economic sense, but it will be not business as usual. And I'm also following the economists, and of course, the current situation is hardly similar to stagflation of the 70s.
Yet.
And therefore, it must be attacked in somehow different way. First of all, we have to pay for monetary and fiscal expansion when we are fighting pandemic, and part of the price has been postponed and now has come as inflation. And we will have to deal with inflation for the time being, but everything will be done within irreversibility of the globalization. So I'm an academic, was I a Deputy Prime Minister, would I be a businessman? Each morning when I would start to shave, I would think, what is going on in the interconnected global economy, and what my small business, big business, transnational company in my country supposed to do to adjust to maximize what I'm trying to maximize to be sufficient, to be successful.
All right, Professor, thank you very much indeed. Let me tell you, you're aware that on Telegram, there's a Telegram bot, and you can contribute your thoughts, and hopefully some of the messages will come to me. And so I plan to open it up using microphones later, but I'd like to know who wants to say something. So can you do that through the Telegram app, please, now, not leaving it right to the end. Henryka, what's your view about where we stand? I mean, you've been working a lot on SMEs in particular. Do you think, particularly with the climate emergency and the scale of the emergency and what John Kerry talks about as the need for wartime mentality, that really psychologically most leaders, whether it be small company or big organizations, can actually come to terms with the enormity of what is happening, the enormity of change and the speed of change, which is why I asked Anne to just underline the scale of change that they are seeing at MasterCard with data.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here. And, when you open any newspaper or internet, whatever, you can find the titles, the life before COVID and after COVID. But the question is it really true that most of the issues that we are facing right now, they were there before COVID? What COVID happened to do to us is to accelerate the process, and showed us maybe in a very dramatic way where are the issues, and that we don't have time to wait to solve those issues.
Should we say 18 years change in 18 months?
Yeah, that's right. And actually, I see several positive aspects. I saw, for example, in Poland, we were fighting, for years to make, the relations between administration and business, more digital. And the answer always, no, this is not the priority, we need time, we need money. And suddenly, during COVID, we did that just in 2 months. That, you can do most of the things. The Prime Minister mentioned here that this is the program for Ukraine. And actually, I think that this is a must to do this, So we just have to follow the Estonia's case, How do they deal with the digitalization and making, the relations between administration and business more transparent, open, and this is the only way. So I mean that it's not that COVID was, definitely, with the people, thousands of them, millions who died and money that was spent, definitely there was a negative, aspect of that. But on the other hand, there were several aspects showing us that, for example, like Grzegorz mentioned, we can't escape from globalization. Maybe we moved too much.
Will it be a different kind of globalization,
that's right.
though?
Maybe we were too much dependent on China, right? And now we are learning our lessons, but I'm afraid that sometimes we can do this when I learned about, the CHIP Act in the US, with $60 billion spent on production on chips, microchips in the US. The same, in the European Union. So we just have to be more balanced, okay?
Well, let me offer you this, and I'd come back to the professor as well and all of you, but to underpin all your answers in the next 45 minutes, the speed at which adjustment has to take place, the speed at which mindsets have to change, the speed at which behavior has to change, the speed at which a realization of the enormity of change has to take place. What's your view?
That a lot depends on, and that would be one of the issues actually that we are facing right now, which is more probably visible right now, the role of state, because in many countries, especially, in the countries that were far away from the creation of a big state, like the US or the United Kingdom, suddenly the state was an employer. Suddenly, the state sent billions in checks, so helped people to survive this time, helped the companies. So that, we just have to discuss that and find out what would be the best way, and every country is different. So I don't think so that this is, one solution. It's different in Poland, different in Ukraine, different in the States, but definitely, if we are to accelerate the process to adjust to what happened with the COVID, we need to have wise, modern, very digitalized government. So to me, if we want to accelerate the process, this is what we should do. And another issue is that if we want to find good solutions, we have to have a dialogue, we have to look for compromises, because it's not up to the states, it's not up to the business, it's not just to, the individuals. We have to find a way, how everyone and every institution can participate in this process.
Well, let's go to the Vice Prime Minister, because you're in a government at the moment, you're of a certain age, but you've actually developed much of your experience in the business, in IT, in digitization. What are you seeing? Because just picking up on what Henryka's just said, need for a wise, digitized government, is that possible given the enormity of what is faced? We've heard from the Prime Minister already this morning, the enormity of what he's facing. But what are your reflections about the ability to change economic activity in line with massive structural changes, some of which have come from COVID, some of which, and I agree with Henryka, actually were coming down the track anyway. It's just happened much faster.
Yes, thank you very much, dear colleagues. There's a lot of information, interesting from our colleague from the MasterCard, first of all. But what we have seen as well, we have seen that throughout the pandemic, people have started to change their customer behavior. They started buying online, they're starting buying locally, they are supporting the local businesses as well. So what have we seen? It's about convenience. So basically, the businesses that are winning right now, if they are becoming more convenient for the users, for the customers, who have started to develop most during the pandemic, the tech companies. What do we mean by the tech companies? The tech companies are the ones that are convenient, that are overcoming the traditional business models because they are convenient and user-friendly. We can see that from Uber, from Airbnb, from Booking, how they have disrupted that. They are flexible and convenient for the users, and they're started changing the sustainable business models that we've had before. So what does the state has to do with that, concerning that? Because, the globalization continues. I support you in that. This is something that will keep on going. What the state has to do in this case, the state should follow that, and the state should become a tech company. The decisions have to be made in the fast pace. There has to be zero bureaucracy involved. We have to have the total deregulation in place, and we don't need to have a lot of state in the economy. Then the state will be the function. It will be more flexible. It will give some certain vision, develop those sectors that doesn't have the business component to it yet. What do we see in the US, for example, in space exploration? Space is also the answer to the question what is going to happen to the climate in our world as well. We wanted to think out of the box. And if, for example, thinking out of the box today, I believed that industry and the other sectors of the businesses that have been negatively impacting climate, I do hope that they will be able to pass them outside of our planet limits. And the first countries who will do that, those are the countries who are developing, who have the GDP to invest into the strategic directions as the space exploration is. So I think the best task for Ukraine would be to make a task for ourselves to become the most convenient country in the world. And we can do it only through technology. Then we will be convenient, people-friendly. We will engage investment because people are looking for convenient conditions. And then we will have money for space as well, and for other sectors and important sectors of life activities. Strategic. But speaking of digitalization overall, the pandemic. And it turned out that before the pandemic, we had some political changes happening in our country. We had the team coming that supports digitalization, and we have had a tremendous leap during those times. And this leap in digitalization was possible because the consumption culture has changed. We now have more than 15 million users of the e-governance system, and in the ecosystem that hasn't been created before of that. We have launched a lot of things like the e-passport, the fastest registration of the businesses in the world. So we're starting to move in the direction of this overall mission and on those goals that we have outlined for ourselves. So I believe that digitalization is about convenience, and the convenience is the competitive advantage for the businesses and for the development.
You have your own experience before you went into government. First of all, you say out of the box. I'd put to you, there is no box anymore. That's the wrong definition. But secondly, what is your frank assessment of the ability of a state of a public service, of civil servants, to actually grip the enormity of change. Because, as you know, the World Bank and the IMF say there's still a very heavy state footprint, certainly in your country. What have you seen as an entrepreneur going into government, which makes you feel, actually, government can change to adapt to this enormous series of changes which are underway?
I believe that the most important thing is for us to understand who we are and where are we going to in a couple of years. The vision. If we'll have the vision, we'll have the people who will help us to implement this vision.
Public servants to people in government, because people in government tend to work in a certain way, which can be a bit slower than the corporate sector.
Well, yes, we have to have those, national ideas that will unite people around it. We'll have to build up the new quality for the public officers as well, and for the state machine as well. But I think that today we've managed to make, digitalization in a way of a pop trend. Because today, due to this innovation structure, we have the deputy on digital transformation in every ministry. We are already building the new public culture. All of our public servants, the top management, they understand that we have to make this decision with technologies as well. In what way you can make what you want to do cheaper, effective, with the help of technology. That is something that is already possible for our government.
Ability to adapt or not?
We have no other choice. We either will adapt and understand that we have to change our mind frame and become the most convenient country in the world and think with tech, or we will not, or we will lag in behind the overall development of the progressive countries and we'll lose people.
Hong Kong, Chandran, welcome. The Global Institute for Tomorrow. Tomorrow keeps arriving, and it arrives at higher speed. You could say that you and I have been treading the same boards together, warning of the kind of things which were coming down the track. And I can't, rather like Henryka, I can't go through your CV, because again, I would be reading it for 10 minutes. But what's your impression about the adaptability of people? It's not just because of COVID, but because of the enormity of digital change, of the compression of the timelines, of the fact that stability is unraveling. And much that has been taken for granted for business decisions, for political decisions, is being challenged right around the world in many ways, including within the European Union. Governments are becoming more nationalistic. I'm just putting ideas in your mind here, because I'd like you to frame where you think we're going to be, not in 10 or 15 years, but maybe 10 or 15 months.
Thank you, Nick. And firstly, good morning to everyone in Kyiv. It's not often you get the chance to speak to people in Kyiv. So first thing I tried to say to answer the question about the 21st century and the title of this conference, which is The World in the Age of Sweeping Changes. I think we need to be very careful when we say a world of sweeping changes and not make it something that is a slogan that applies to everyone. If you're in China, India, Africa, Europe, it's all very different. So one of the things I like to say, and Nick, you've talked often about thinking the unthinkable. I've been struck by how we have, you have, and people have hung on to what the IMF and the World Bank think. Coming back to what you said about the economists saying that we can't go back to the 70s. Well, the IMF and World Bank, take us back to the 60s. So I would say, we need to think very differently about the world we live in. And the point of having someone like me, I suppose, and I'm conscious of the audience in Kyiv, is to try and provide a slightly different worldview. So when we think about the world sweeping changes in this part of the world, then what you are struck by, and particularly living in Hong Kong, is the tension between the West and the rest of the world. The tension between the United States and China. So what I'm struck by, and as most people in this part of the world, I will not speak for people in Africa, etc., is the inability to accept the arrival of what I call a post-Western world. A post-Western world was not defined by what the IMF and World Bank think only, or what the economist thinks the worldview needs to be. So when I think of the world, and I think of a post-COVID world, I would like to suggest to people that we don't go down the rabbit hole that everything digital is going to land us in a good space. I think we're already beginning to think that, we need to have a very careful review of the fashionable view that somehow the world is digital. And often I try and remind people of a very simple thing, that human beings don't live on a digital platform. They live, in fact, on a biological platform. So when I think of the Asia Pacific and I think of the 21st century's economy, and to put in the context of people in Europe, numbers matter. Today, the Asia Pacific region has a population of over 4.5 billion people. In the next 40 years, we'll be adding about another 1.5 billion people. Just imagine that. So when then we talk about prosperity and change and opportunities, and given the wake-up call we've been given to COVID, I agree with you, we have to think the unthinkable. And in my view, that means redefining what do we even think about in terms of prosperity. So let me make 2 points, and then hopefully this will stimulate some discussion. 6 billion people in Asia. There'll be more people living in this part of the world than anywhere else in the world. This will be the most populated part of the world. Can 6 billion Asians live, or should they even aspire to live like Europeans and Americans? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know this is impossible, and in fact, therefore, highly undesirable. The question then is, how do we deliver on a prosperity that gives them dignity, allows them to live comfortable lives, but not excessive lives taken for granted in liberal economies? And that is the big challenge. Therein lies the big question about, therefore, what does prosperity look like? And I would argue that we talk about a moderate prosperity. The Chinese have recently coined a framing around the world of common prosperity. So then let me end by just saying that you had mentioned the existential threat of climate. Well, we need to be intellectually honest, think the unthinkable, by knowing that if we are to address the issue of climate, then Africans and Asians cannot consume like Europeans and Americans. It is not possible. We will have to redefine what their rights will be. This discussion about redefining rights and freedoms, including your ability to consume endlessly, which is taken as a human right in the United States and other parts of the West, will have to be challenged, because we will have to price consumption in ways that restrict excessive consumption, which is added to the crisis we are. And therefore, the challenge, the sweeping challenges we think in the world, very much depend if you're going to be living as a citizen of India with 1.5 billion people, or a citizen of ASEAN with 1 billion people, the majority of whom don't have access to the basic rights. So I think that is the economic challenge, but it's not a challenge faced in the West. In the West, it is simply about how do we continue to maintain the levels of prosperity and increase them and continue the engine of economic growth. In the rest of the world, it is how do we give people the basic rights to dignity, housing, basic amounts of energy. But the numbers are so huge, they will have dramatic impacts on the world. And that is how I think the discussion about globalization, it's not about globalization. I mean, globalization is a factor of human history. The question is, what are the rules? And neoliberal economic policies of the IMF and the World Bank have essentially allowed people to imagine that globalization is something that will automatically enhance prosperity, but is based on a fundamental economic fault, which is the inability to price externality. And the carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases issues are just tip of the iceberg. So let me just stop there and say that is the rethink we need to have. And I believe that this part of the world in Africa will have to rewrite the script. And that will not be written in the West because of his inability to adjust to that new world order.
And just to pick up on that, if I may, the Dasgupta review before COP26 has said very clearly that business has not put a value on nature. And here we are 100 kilometers from Chernobyl. And we know what happened there in 1986. But let me just quickly put this to you. It's not about thinking the unthinkable, Chandran. It's about thinking the unpalatable. How much do you think people really understand the enormity of the change which is coming probably much quicker than they ever imagined?
I think people, policymakers are in denial. From John Kerry to all of those to take up the podiums at COP, they are in denial about the dilemma I posed to you. 6 billion people cannot consume by Europeans and Americans. Therefore, and I'm being controversial here, the rights and freedoms will have to be restricted. Car ownership, how much gasoline they can consume, how much water. That is the massive denial. Thus, the fascination with things like, which are in fact non-scientific, slogans like net zero. There is no such thing as net zero, ask any scientist. And therefore, the denial is massive. And let me also say something that may sound controversial. You need long-term plans, and liberal democracies are unequipped, in my view, to deal with this crisis. Thus, the tensions between the state and the citizenship, who essentially say, we want to maintain our lives, you need to maintain it. We care about climate, but my God, don't affect the price of gasoline. So I think everyone can see the irony. We're talking about climate change, but Joe Biden is at the same time saying, hey, please, more gasoline and cheaper. And that is not possible, and therefore the role of the state becomes very important.
All right.
And we live in an era where we need draconian rules to curb the appetite of human beings to live out of sync with the limits.
All right. What I'm wondering, Yuri or Alex, I'd like to get some views from the audience here. I can't see anybody at the moment, but I'm not getting any messages on Telegram. So could someone raise the lights in here so I can at least see the audience? But and I can see a gentleman here, but there may be someone further back. Alex, can we move the microphones around? Because I'd like to, could we have some light in here, please? So I can see the audience. The microphone here, I'll come to you in a moment. All of you on the platform, let me just pick up what Chandran has been saying particularly, and also what the Vice Prime Minister said, about the ability to adapt. What, Professor, do you think is the ability to adapt, given new economic realities? We've seen and we've heard from Ann Cairns already the way people are doing it because if they want to spend money, they're going to have to spend it in a different way through cards and through bank transfer. In other words, you as an economist having to realize that people are going to act economically in a very different way.
It's a very complex process, but it depends very much on institutions, but also on leadership and also on education. I would start with an attempt to change the narrative, where we are going and for what reason.
But aren't events changing the narrative, Professor? Aren't events changing the narrative?
For instance, if you are Prime Minister of Ukraine or Poland or President Biden or Xi Jinping, stop talking about maximization of GDP. Start talking about optimization of Human Development Index or inequality-adjusted Human Development Index or environment pressure Human Development Index, which is evaluated on an annual basis by United Nations Development Program, UNDP. Upon how you measure depends where you are going. I'm not sure if it makes a rhyme in Ukraine. In Polish we say, od tego jak mierzysz, zależy gdzie, dokąd zmierzasz. How you measure depends where you are going. When we are maximizing GDP, and we are comparing what is GDP per capita in Ukraine, and it is only one-third of Poland, and Polish is one-third of Germany, this is the road to another crisis, what Chandra said about overconsumption. So now you have a couple of methods. One is Chinese, for instance, impose a tough restriction. Kids cannot be online more than 3 hours per week to play the video games by force of the government, by will of the government. And now you can start debate, is it correct or not? I think that each teacher with an open mind would say, basically, this is correct. But administrative measures, this is what we don't like. So the other approach is that the priest or the father or the teacher, we say, don't do that. So this is the matter of education, and this is the long shot. Answer your question, are we learning fast enough? Sometime, yes, especially when we are forced. For instance, by crisis of pandemic, we learned plenty of things much faster than otherwise. But sometimes it just called for leadership. we have to bring to the equation the question, what quality of leadership we do have. And I am afraid, I do know this word, I cannot point to very many examples of a proper leadership up to the challenges. This is the very weak part, and for that reason I put much more trust now in the business leaders than in the political leaders, which is a pity to say so, but that is the case.
I was at a closed conference recently where a very senior civil servant said what needs to be done can only be done by politicians who are prepared to commit political suicide in doing it.
Not at all. Not at all. I heard it so many times, etc. First I was Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance in 3 subsequent governments. Somehow I was keeping the process going on, but if you are committed, you can convince the people that you are right. This is just stupidity, but what we often hear, that we know, I mean the politicians, they say, we know what to do, but we don't know how to win the next election.
I saw Chandran offering massive support to everything you just said. Henryka, let me pick up, and let me just, before I go to the first question, let me just take it even further, that actually there has to be a redefining of values and expectation, picking up on the redefinition, not of GDP, but of something different for measuring the way we are doing things.
Yeah, and actually you can watch this, for example, what's going on in the States, which is the perfect example of the liberal democracy, right? And when they did the survey, almost 80% of Americans, they supported the role of the government and the money they were getting from the government. And now, Biden's reforms, they are introducing something which is, for us in Europe, completely obvious, like paid maternity leave, right? So it's not just about, like Grzegorz mentioned, the GDP per capita. It's about, something that we are very proud here in Europe, which is costly, this entire system of social support that we have. So I think that COVID, convinced us that actually we just have to have a balanced approach to our life. It's not just about money, and sure, it's interesting the
so
data.
Different values.
Yeah,
different
values, absolutely. And I think that we in Europe, and especially in Central Europe, because we have, this combination, this heritage, which is sometimes very negative, of the centrally planned economy and non-democratic system. But then we joined, the European Union, and we know what that means. That was, for us, completely clear that we want to live in a country of the market economy and liberal democracy. Now, looks like we are looking for a kind of, I can't say it's a convergence, but we are looking for another way, how we can spend the assets that we have here, on our earth in the best way. And
right.
Without values, and talking only about money and GDP per capita and wealth, definitely it's not enough.
These are big changes. There's been a big project at the British Academy talking about the need about the future of the corporation. The future of the corporation is not to create problems, but to make money from solving problems as opposed to creating problems. Let me pick up with a few interventions. I would like to ask you, forgive me for not speaking Ukrainian, please be brief, because I just want to hear the kind of mix of what you'd like to put into this discussion. And Anne, I haven't seen your hand go up, but I will come to you in a moment if you'd like me to. Please. Microphone here, please.
Yeah. Thank you, Nick. I'll be brief. Andriy Tsimbel,
the managing partner, KPMG in Ukraine. I have a comment and a question to you, Mykhailo. On digital transformation, first of all, I would like to say that it's very important. We understand that the future is about, that's about the future. It's important that it has been done. We have heard Prime Minister saying that Ukraine is leading in this question. So first of all, I would like to express your gratitude for what you have been doing. That's important. But I want to comment about the risks connected to that.
Quick, please.
Yeah, I'll speed up.
In context of that, I want to refer to the CO2 research that has been done by our company, and among the CEOs of the biggest companies, and they have been outlining one of the biggest risks is the risks of cybersecurity. And I will just give you a quote. They just say that's not just issue.
The risk of cybersecurity. Yeah. I'll come back. keep that for a moment. Let me see what that gentleman would like, and move the microphone to somebody else, please. Yeah, please.
Yeah, I'll finish up.
Yeah.
I said brief.
Good day. My name is Vyacheslav, and I have a question to Vice Prime Minister as well. Mykhailo, thank you very much again for all of the good job that you've done. But the question is as follows. Can you please... today, some of the people of Ukraine are forced to live at the temporarily occupied and temporarily annexed territories of Ukraine. The services that you provide, do you plan some innovations or novelties so that people could use those services on those territories as well? And are you ready to take the offers from their sides so their life would be comfortable there as well?
This is beginning to sound like a political press conference. I'm just going to pick up on that question as well.
I have the mic now. Yuri Grzegorz, киянин, який живе.
Yuri Grzegorz, the Kievan who has been living abroad for a long time.
Challenging into opportunity, like increasing prices for gas, independence on, say, energy resources to Russia, to developing green energy and benefiting from this and actually becoming a leader. What does the world and Ukraine need to do it? Like with electric cars, first they were developed to push electric energy, then people realize they're actually faster and more fun to drive here. Can we make it in general?
All right, thank you. So what I'm going to do is offer the first two questions to you, Vice Premier, and then we're going to open it up into the issues of the greening of what lies ahead, please. But first, cybersecurity, and then that particular question about your eastern part of your country.
Yes, thank you very much for your question. So speaking about cybersecurity, cybersecurity is a challenge for everyone, and we have to work about that. 80% of time we're doing that in our direction, so we're working on that. It is impossible to build up any kind of digital state without the cybersecurity challenges. And, you know, people are spending time in space already, but we are still afraid of some simple cybersecurity issues. This is a challenge. We have to take it. We have to develop in this direction. That's clear. Speaking on providing the services for Ukrainians who are living at the temporarily occupied territories, we are already starting it launching. For example, we have this e-baby service that gives you the opportunity to have the birth registration there, and we're working on this direction. You can join us. You can contact our deputy because he's responsible for that. We want to take all of the barriers down for the Ukrainians who live at the temporarily occupied territories. We want to create them the opportunities to access that online. We'll create the best services.
On the green energy, and there's a gentleman there and another one here, so get the microphones moving around. But the greening, all of you, the greening of the future opportunities, do you think the penny is dropping, or the euro cent is dropping, about the enormity and the inevitability, the irreversibility, the imperative to green what we are doing? Henryka.
You know, we have right now a perfect example. I mean, that wonderful goal just can't work, because if you have a country like Poland that is completely dependent, 80% of the energy comes from the coal, right? And that is the government that has an idea of building 1 million electric cars, and all those cars would get energy from the coal. So, I mean, the question is, what's your priority?
But the miners in Katowice, where COP was 3 years ago, have accepted this have accepted that inevitability now, which is extraordinary.
That's why, I mean, that from this perspective, maybe, you know, this is for the government right now, no escape, because there was always an escape, you know, to find a kind of a play with the trade unions and, you know, not to do what was necessary to do to transform Polish energy sector. And now, because what EU is doing, and actually there is not much acceptance for that in my country, but we are under so big pressure that I hope that finally, you know, we will do this. It takes time, and the question is in which direction we'll go, because again, for Poland, probably we can't escape nuclear energy and, you know, small, probably, reactors, but definitely, what's going on right now is pushing the government in this direction, and I hope that most of the people, they understand, yes, we have to do this, right? We
Grzegorz,
have to do this.
What's your view, not just from Poland, but particularly the greening. We're looking at an era of change and opportunity. There are many who say that, particularly in Eastern Europe, who say they feel threatened by green because it's going to remove their jobs. So we're talking about a transition of building confidence to create new opportunities. So it's not about surviving, it's about thriving. Can those changes come through? It's not about using the word optimism or pessimism, it's about being positive out of all of this.
Yes, they can, and they do. I think that we are not in as bad situation as it has been showed, commented by especially media and some policymakers. We have made tremendous progress, and we will see another step forward at COP26 next month in Glasgow. Maybe this is the fun that so much happened due to this famous Greta Thunberg, not to the leadership of European Union or President of Ukraine or Prime Minister of Poland. But here, the engagement of NGO, independent media, academia, research, business, but first of all, political commitment. I'm a former policymaker. I was dealing with this case from different perspective, and sometimes we used administrative measures, but always associated with social security. You have to be aware, you mentioned Katowice, Gdańsk, to go to Śląsk. That is where our coal is mostly. When I was sitting at the round table in 1989, in coal mining industry, the employment was 430,000 people. It was untouchable. Now there is less of them than 100,000. And there was a strong political fight. I had even across of my window from the government office, thousands of miners coming to demonstrate against my policy. But first we have to provide a labor opportunity, alternative. It's a long shot.
But you think it's moving in that direction?
Yes, it is moving in this direction, and we do create very many new jobs. There is not a threat of mass unemployment because of green transformation. There is not a threat of mass unemployment because of the technological revolution, because new job opportunities are coming to the fore. And then we can cut the labor time, and we will do, which will create another response on the supply side and the demand side. So as for green technology, it calls for tough political commitment and the proper institutions. It is very difficult. You said just a minute ago, we have to contain our consumption. So presume that Mr. Klitschko is enforcing the law, that you cannot drive your car during the rush hour, only one person in the car. That would be another revolution on Maidan, because the consumer will not accept it. But maybe this is the solution. I know the highways in US where the sign, $270 penalty for driving alone. You have to drive with somebody else. And there is adjustment, but you must provide also, and that is the public authorities' opportunity, alternative good public transport. What happens in very many countries, and from this perspective, you in Ukraine, we in Poland, unfortunately, we are lagging behind, but these problems do have the solution and they will be solving. And despite everything what has been said, the situation now is a little bit better than it was 2 or 12 or 20 years ago.
Thank you. Who's got the microphone? Please. Have you got the microphone? Who's got a microphone? Can you get the microphone to somebody quickly, please? Over there. And then the gentleman at the back. 2 microphones, please. Can we have another microphone?
I have a question. UBA, DIA technology, they're working with the 4G technology to have this coverage all over the country. When will we have 5G? And what do you expect? Not just what you expect, but all of the participants of discussion, because I think it's very interesting for everyone, even for the MasterCard, the 5G emergence. Thank you very much. Today I have been to another conference that has been dedicated to 5G. We have already started our research work on that, and next year we're planning to have the tenders open to have the frequencies between the operators of the 5G. Right now we're working with 4G. We had some troubles with that. We have 3 million of Ukrainians have had the first time 4G technology. We are developing the 5G technology as well. So next year we're going to have the frequencies on tender. I hope in in 2 years, we'll be actively start introducing the 5G technologies in the cities. In a couple of weeks in the unit city, we will open the 5G center where you'll be able to test out this technology. And how will we use it? I think first of all, we'll use it for the industrial needs, the 5G connection, the big industrial centers, big cities, and then we will spread it to all over the country, because it's a different content and there's a lots of peculiarities of how it will influence.
A massive multiplier everywhere, including in the rural areas.
Yes, it will definitely be an accelerator, but we have to resolve the issues with the 4G so that 95% of Ukrainians would have the access to 4G, and it will influence the digital economy as well, because 5G will mostly be accelerating the industry. First of all, the Internet of Things, for example, those directions. But we have to cover all of the problems with the Internet penetration, because it has a foundation for all of us today. Andriy Hrytsanko, my name is. The world is now developing in that way that one part of the society has been moving forward really fast through digitalization and other transformations, but the rest of the world lays behind, and they're not ready to take those changes and transformations, and we have no reasons to say that they will ever be ready to transform. And there is this gap in each society, in Ukraine, inside of the country, between the countries. It seemed like in these conditions, the elite should offer the joint efforts how we can prevail over this gap. But if we will analyze how the governments and elites work, they're not ready for that as well. And we have no reasons to say that they will know how to do that. If that's so I assume we're going to the big chaos. And I wanted to ask you about that. Do you see this gap building between the two parts of society? Or can you answer those questions?
You can hear the Ukrainian English translation. Is that right? Anne, can you hear the translation or not?
I can hear the translation occasionally.
All right.
I can hear it too.
Okay, what I'd like to do is just ask you, let me refocus that question, but with the same theme, about societal division. Are you seeing any sociological change in the way people are spending money? Because what has happened, in my experience, and you can see it, is that almost everyone is now using a card or using bank transfers. How has this really led to a leveling off of the way people are spending money and spending their wealth or whatever money they've got, rather than just digging into their pockets?
Okay, so I think that the greatest societal division is actually the division between men and women around the world. Women are very much excluded from taking their part in most of the world's big economies. And there's actually nowhere on the planet, including Iceland, where women are in an equal position to men. And the World Economic Forum have said that it's going to take us 250 years to get there. And we're losing billions to the economy as a result of this. So I think that the social contract is broken, and that business, civil society and government need to look at this with all seriousness climate change. And businesses can't succeed in a failing world. And that's why you have companies like us saying things like, we want to reach the next 50 million SMEs, but we want to reach 25 million of those led by women to try and level the playing field. By the way, in terms of the SMEs, our latest data is that new companies have been forming at a rate of 1/3 faster in 2020 than they did in 2019. These businesses are springing up all over the world, particularly in places like UK, US, and Australia are leading the charge. And we know that the world's economy is largely driven by SMEs in many different countries. And so in actual fact, these small companies are being created because people are moving out of the more traditional labor force, and they're moving from bigger companies into smaller companies, and they're trying to survive in this digital economy.
Thank you.
They're adapting very quickly.
And that's actually been underscored by Minouche Shafik, who is the president of the London School of Economics, with an important book about the redefining of the social contract. And it builds on everything we've been hearing from the platform already. We're almost out of time. Chandran, you wanted to come in.
Yes, just can I quickly say, I totally agree with Anne about the women's issue, but let's also talk about the tyranny of essentially a Western-dominated world. That too is fully acknowledged, and that is the struggle we have. I talk about this in my upcoming book about the dismantling of global white privilege for sphere. But I just want to make 2 points before we end. The first is that, again, typically in all of these conversations, we say the world has changed, the pandemic has arrived, etc. Well, we then go back to what we want to do, which is we know digital technology, and therefore the future is all about digital technology. I will argue that it's very uncertain if digital technology is a net good going forward. And I'm not just talking about pornography, which is much part of what the internet is about, but I'm also talking about the ability of people to consume relentlessly without paying for the true cost. You can do it with an app. So the question is, I believe in technology, I'm an engineer by training, but digital for what purpose and what end? And therein comes the role of the state. And I agree with many of the things that the professor said. The state has a critical role. There is a myth, and perpetuated by business leaders, that somehow they're the most intelligent people on the planet, and those people working in government are slow, don't know what to do. That's not true. I will argue in the 21st century, the best and smartest people ought to be working for the government to restrain the excesses of essentially business leaders. Not because they are bad, but business doesn't do public and common good. That is not what drives business leaders. I live in Hong Kong, and I've worked with businesses all around the world. That is not what businesses are geared towards. So we will need very strong, capable states. And when professors said, you know, we need business leaders, political leaders, to stop talking about GDP, absolutely right. And we need the IMF and the World Bank to stop using GDP as the measure and the tyranny for measuring where countries are in terms of their rankings.
All right.
And I can say that, you know, President Xi in China has already talked about moving beyond GDP and using other metrics.
Right.
But technology to what end? And last point, China has essentially decided that the tech companies will need to be constrained. And they have done that, particularly with regard to the internet, with regard to education, and with regard to gaming.
All
the
right.
state has to intervene.
So all of you need to leave here with the idea that there's got to be a revision of everything you take for granted. Let me take 3 more minutes, because I'd like to ask, first of all, the Vice Prime Minister, just to respond to that. Digital doesn't necessarily mean good. And then I'm just going to pick up on a couple of other points.
You know, I basically know that the main issue for the technology is the opportunity to provide the life, to make life more comfortable, and we will have a couple additional dimensions to that. When we will digitalize all of the services, then the offline centers of the service provision, they will be offline, but they will work faster, because we will have an optimized, you know, back office and all of the inside infrastructure. So technologies is about making everything more convenient and opening new opportunities. Different people can use technologies in a different way, with different frequency, different life situations. For example, someone is going to be, you know, working with their jet lag with the help of an app, and someone doesn't use that. It's just a very simple example that many different life situations can apply those technologies for the benefit of people. And we have spoken a lot, and we have heard a lot that we should not speak about the GDP, but, you know, in our country, we don't speak about GDP enough. You know, we don't have this 20, 30 thousand of GDP, so we could start talking about the GDP per capita. While we still don't have enough money for supporting our physiological needs, we'll still have to talk about GDP. We have 60,000 per capita.
Poland. Grzegorz, first of all, and both of you, Henryka as well. The future role of the state. During COVID, many people have relied on the state and assumed the state would step in order to save their jobs, but also to save the economy. Is that a significant, irreversible shift, or was it a transitory phase? Grzegorz?
Definitely the state will be the government, and governance cannot stay the course But don't make mistake. Don't make the state the enemy of business. Look for a positive synergy, because the future, the art of the future, is to find an optimal way, which is contextual, different in Brazil, different in Nigeria, different in Ukraine or in Poland, how to combine the invisible hand of market with the visible hand of government. I was a government in this sense somehow. You judge it how successful it was, but I think that very much, to some extent. Nika was Minister for Trade and Industry, even earlier than myself in the government. So there was the market and there was the government. And bureaucracy per se is not an enemy of the people. It can be. But the question is how to manage. I'm from School of Business, Kozminski. There's plenty of Ukrainian students, so maybe this is also our contribution to your development somehow. We are teaching them how to be good in business management, but also in administration. So I don't like this discussion, how much of state measured by the share of output from state companies. State for me is, first of all, good regulation. The market must be regulated for a number of reasons we were talking here about. You know, market without regulation is a nonsense. It's an extreme neoliberal approach, and it's just a utopia. It's not even a theory. We can put a model into the computer or in the textbook, what is the free market, but market is never free, and there is never full competition, and therefore taking care of the proper, fair competition is also a matter of the regulation.
Right,
and the subject of regulation is the government. And my last question is about what my colleague, if I may say so, Deputy Prime Minister, said, that digital is always good and good for us. Take a look. It's not true. Because of this digital revolution, very many of you, instead of listening to what I'm saying, are texting. I'm not sure that this is the good use of the digital revolution.
No, but Grzegorz, no. But they're reporting what you're saying. They're reporting to other people what you're saying.
No.
They're proliferating your message.
Business people are not reporting. Journalists are reporting, and you know who else is reporting.
Henryka, very quickly, the role of government.
Coming from the business,
please.
yeah, but coming from the business and having an experience of my governmental work, I think that we have to be careful about the role of the business as well. And especially right now in the digitization, in the digital era, when you look at the big data companies, which are having capitalization bigger than budgets of many countries, you know, not small countries. And, you know, they can afford for, I mean, lobbying, legal, you know, aspects that they can provide, you know, in different governments. I think that we need transparency, and you know what happened, I mean, with the hearing in the Congress, in the US Congress, you know, showed us that actually to have wise government, wise people in the legal system who are able to be partners for the business, it's absolutely crucial. So it's, we have to look for a balanced approach, you know? And the new relations, and they have to be very transparent, because otherwise, you know, I am afraid that we can enter, you know, uncharted waters of, you know, the system which is actually not run by the governments and not run by the business.
All right. Well, thank you very much indeed. We've overstayed our welcome, but in fact, because it was a very rich discussion, and also because the Prime Minister's session went on longer than we expected, which was all good. So, Anne and Chandran, thank you very much indeed for joining us from London and from Hong Kong. Tomorrow is only tomorrow, Chandran. And Vice Premier, and also Professor Kolodko, and also Henryka, Bochniarz, welcome. Thank you very much indeed. I've enjoyed enormously your contributions. I would urge you not to talk about optimism or pessimism, but being positive from what you've heard, and positive from the ideas that you've heard here, because change can be positive and needs to be positive. It doesn't have to be viewed with foreboding, even if it's unsettling. And that's where we are at the moment. So thank you all very much indeed. Enjoy lunch.